Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thrive Innovation Series. I know that people are from all over the world, so it could be good evening for a lot of you as well. Welcome to our series. I'm John Hartnett, CEO and founder of SVG Ventures and Thrive. I'm delighted to be here today and joined by the US Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue. Great to have you here today, Secretary.
Thank you. Good to be with you, John.
I hope everybody's keeping safe and healthy during these challenging times. And we've all experienced the critical importance of the food supply chain, starting in the field and working through a complex supply chain of processing, logistics, and retail, and ending up with food on our tables. And I think as we've all experienced, there is no other supply chain as important as the one that puts food on our family table. Next slide. Our Thrive Innovation Series, we launched it earlier this year, and our focus is to look at the future of food and the future of the supply chain and emerging technologies. Every month we will chat to key leaders, CEOs and founders and innovators that are shaping the future of food and agriculture. And in the coming months, later this month, we will have the CEO of the National Pork Board, Bill Evan, and Joe Weber, Senior Vice President of Smithfield. And in July 9th, we'll have the CEO of Trimble, Rob Painter. Next slide. I'd like to thank our corporate partners, some of the biggest names in the industry, and we're delighted to be working with them to accelerate their innovation and growth strategy. And I'd like to do a special call out to one of our most recent partners, CSIRO, the Australian National Science Organization, where we're going to focus to help commercialize their innovation and research to help farmers around the world. Next slide. So we're joined by quite a number of folks today. I think we've close to 1,000 people on the call today from about 50 different countries, and you know, from every continent in the world. So we're delighted to have such a global audience, and obviously I know the Department of Agriculture in Ireland, my special home country, are there. So hello to everybody in Ireland. Next slide. We're going to launch a poll this morning, and you'll probably see it pop up on your screen right now. And the poll will cover a couple of questions, one on COVID-19 and the impact and the challenges for the ag sector, and then also some questions regarding the sustainability initiatives. And if you want to, you can start voting and then, or start polling, and then we'll talk to that you know, later on. Next slide. Our special guest this morning, US Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Perdue, came by his knowledge of agriculture the old-fashioned way. He was born into a family farm in Bonaire, Georgia. From childhood and through his life in business and elected office, Perdue has experienced the industry from every possible perspective. Under Secretary Perdue, the USDA is facts-based and data-driven with decision-making mindset that is customer-focused. As former governor of Georgia, he is a strong believer in good government who will seek solutions to problems and not lament on the agencies might be faced with difficult challenges. Welcome, Secretary. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, John, thank you very much.
I was delighted to share the stage with you at the 96th Annual Agricultural Outlook Forum and talk a little bit about your agriculture innovation agenda. You laid out a great vision and some great goals for the country and for the innovators around the world. And it would be great if you'd be able to maybe take a few minutes and talk a little bit about your vision and talk a little bit about the agricultural innovation agenda.
Well, thank you, John, and I appreciate the invitation to join you at your Thrive Innovation Series, and we very much appreciate your visiting with us at our Ag Innovation Summit in February here in Washington, D.C. And I think at that time we could see almost a kindred spirit of understanding the innovation and developments are really the key to the future in agriculture and really throughout our society. It's interesting to me that this pandemic, even after that period of time, has taught us even more about the fragility and the importance of our food supply chain. I think many people I know here in the United States probably had not thought that much about our food supply chain because we're blessed with an abundance, and typically in our grocery stores and retail outlets and even in our restaurants, the menu choices and the choices among the shelves are the biggest challenge we have in trying to pick which one of those things that we want. So we consider ourselves very blessed as a nation to experience that. But I think many people here saw the situation of those things just don't magically appear on those shelves, but they are the network of a very integrated, sophisticated, even synchronized food supply chain that puts food on our tables for our families. And how will we continue that? We've seen the potential threat that really couldn't be contemplated anyway. I would submit that the efficiency of our food supply chain led to this dual track of producers and processors and packagers and even logistics serving two different markets: the institutional food service market, whether it's restaurants, hotels, conventions, or schools and colleges, and the other another dual track that efficiently serve the restaurant or the grocery store market. So when we saw the one supply chain from a demand perspective close almost overnight, that created some serious misalignment of supply and demand that we had to be extremely nimble and in trying to realign to direct so that production would not go to waste. And we've been busy about that. You might know, I think the world knew that we had some real challenges in our meat production supply chain with an inordinate amount of affection in our workers, our meat pack workers in that regard that we had to work very, very carefully regarding. And the good news is we're back up to about 90 to 95% production in those facilities. So that was the important. You can imagine if the shelves in the United States became bare, it could have created quite a panic, not only here, but around the world. That we heard from our importers around the world of how important getting these plants back up was to them as well, because of the export of U.S. products around the world. Mm-hmm. So as we spoke in February, John, I think you and I aligned in as I said, a kindred spirit of innovation really being the key. The challenges are there. The world population is growing. The need to do more with less is there. And we showed a slide, Jess, if you'll put up the first slide, we showed the productivity gains that we've seen here in the United States over the last, really since 1930. It's really almost about 4 times, close to 4 times the productivity. And we see the various things that happened during that period of time from the 1930s all the way through the middle 2015s there over the technology gains that we've had. So I would submit to you and your listeners that in the United States, we're actually doing more with less, which means a more sustainable production, less environmental footprint than we had even back in the other days. And I think while we see many people really wanting to go backwards in what I would consider a style of the 1950s, I don't believe that will feed the world. And I don't believe it's going to be environmentally friendly, because it's going to take many more acres that to do the same production that we're doing today. So that's really the real need for agricultural innovation. And I'm so happy that you, with this Thrive series and others, are bringing other non-traditional partners, private sector partners, into the ag research area. Let's go to the next slide, Jessica. We'll talk about the need. Our motto at USDA is to do right and feed everyone. Obviously, feeding everyone is a challenge with a growing world population, and in a very short period of time of almost 10 billion people. So, and the do right portion is a motto that's much easier to say than it is to do. How do we do right? By being stewards of the land, that we are part of a global community, and we've got to do more with less and more impact on our society and on our environment. And we will talk about some of those things later on about the things we're holding ourselves accountable to be. But we've got, I believe innovation is really the only way that we can meet these challenges that we see here on the screen, almost 10 billion people by 2050. Jess, the next slide. So our U.S. Agricultural Innovation Agenda, with our motto, do right and feed everyone, our goal here, John, one of these things is, we'll talk about a scoreboard. One of those things is we want to do our part. We think USDA can be a convener. We understand that most of these ideas, frankly, are going to come from the private sector. And we're blessed globally to have some great thinkers and innovators. We want to be conveners. USDA puts a lot of money into research, basic research, applied research, but much of that work in the finishing product certainly comes from the private sector. And we are seeing just a wonderful startup. Many of your startups in this space are out there that have different viewpoints, maybe not really tainted by the way we've always done things, but understanding how we do have to do things differently to achieve the kind of goals that we're talking about here, which is increasing U.S. agricultural production by 40% while cutting the environmental footprint of U.S. agriculture in half just by 2050 when those 10 billion people show up. So those are good aspirational stretch goals. We think based on the trajectory of what we've done since 1930, they are attainable, and we're going to work very hard to hold ourselves accountable to that. But how do we do that? Jess, the next slide. As we indicated, and you're a big believer, obviously, in the basic and applied research and innovation. Really, the research is a real key. We need to do more, not less, and in the food supply chain and the business of producing food. The different programs that we'll do between the USDA and our private sector partners and the private sector economy is very important as we convene and collaborate in these efforts. These programs are extremely important. You indicated earlier that we like to pride ourselves in being facts-based, data-driven decision makers. I'm not instinctively smart enough to know which direction to go without good direction signs. And we use good metrics and data to get us there and to direct where policy should go in that regard. So we look forward to doing that. Fourth is we think, I used a phrase there, I think at the meeting where one of our famous football coaches said, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. We can't afford to practice in this important endeavor of feeding everyone. So we've got a scoreboard laid out that we want to understand how we're doing quarter by quarter, moment by moment along this, not waiting and hope we get there, but understanding we've got to make incremental progress as we go in a steady pace. So those are the things that we want to talk about. We're excited about partnering with you and all of your Thrive partners in an ag innovation agenda that we believe is imperative to accomplish the challenges that we have going forward. So thank you for allowing me to join you today. I look forward to questions as well as the conversation that you and I can have with a fireside chat.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary. And obviously, this is very refreshing. It's very forward-looking, and I love the analogy of football. I'm obviously a rugby man myself, or soccer, but you know, keeping score is key. But you know, you don't win if you don't score goals. So I think commercialization of research and getting improvement into the farms, I think, is key. Before we kind of look to the future, I mean, obviously, we're going through something that none of us had ever planned. When we got together in February, you know, we were pointed forward in terms of innovation and the innovation agenda. But this has kind of created a big challenge. Maybe before we talk about some of the negatives, what have been some of the silver linings, you know, in terms of for you personally and also for the USDA? I know that the USDA teams have been very much in the front lines during this pandemic and addressing a lot of the challenges. Maybe do you want to talk a little bit about what you've experienced over the last, 3 months now?
Well, it has been challenging, obviously. Certainly the biggest challenge that we mentioned earlier was in our meat and protein processing plants, both beef, pork, and poultry. When you know that this synchronized system of pork production is really a just-in-time. Most of our modern pork production facilities, it's like a hotel. You have certain rooms that are occupied, and when your reservation is over, you've got to move out because other people are moving in. And if those animals don't have a place to go to be harvested and processed, then that's a huge backup. And we saw that happening. We were tracking that every day. That's where data comes into it. And I kept asking our team, are we driving off a cliff? Are we getting better or worse? And we did find out there was a pretty severe V bottom that occurred in our meat processing there. We're down at one point probably to in the 60 to 70% of year-over-year harvesting. Fortunately, as I indicated, we're back up into the 90-95% realm now. But it took agility, it took good data, and it took moving quickly to do that in order to avert a real crisis. So I think the big lesson we learned, John, is nothing beats good, accurate data, because that's the best way to drive policy decisions. That's the best way to drive productivity, is good data. None of us are smart enough to intuitively know what to happen. And for those, many of the naysayers said that you should have thought about this and you should have thought about that, have never been, they sit on the sidelines. They're not in the game where the competition takes place. So it's been an interesting challenge. I'm proud of our industry overall, from the producers and the ranchers to the processors and the packers to our overall logistical system that helped deliver that to the tables of families here in the United States as well as worldwide. Our exports actually didn't suffer that much. We wanted to send the signal that the United States can be counted on to be a reliable supplier. So we were not hoarding that production like some countries may have suggested. We wanted to share that with our regular customers the way we always have. So those were the kind of things that we dealt with during this period of time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Secretary. It's great news, to hear that, meat production is back up in the 90s. That obviously kind of affected everybody, every family, our family here, at home and around the world. When you look at some of these challenges that we've kind of gone through, what's the biggest learning for you as you kind of looked at this pandemic, dealt with the issues, and as you move forward, how are you going to adjust things? You've looked at the metrics, things happen that you didn't want. How are you going to address, maybe the future? Hopefully we never have anything like this again, but what will be some of the key learnings, and how will you apply those learnings for the next number of years?
Surely, hopefully we won't have anything like this again, but we will have other crises that coming in the future. That's just part of life, John. And I think while our federal governments are really not known for their nimbleness or their agility, that's exactly what it takes in times like this. You've got to continue to be dynamic in your policies. We're a regulatory agency, as you know, and right away when schools were closed, we had to give waivers for many of those regulations that didn't make sense in the light of this pandemic, where kids were out of school. How are those nutrition meals going to be delivered to them, and those kind of things. So we work 24/7, and our teams, even in a remote working environment, were very helpful in working with our state partners in order to get waivers out there and upping the output for people having access to food in that regard. So you've got to be nimble, and you've got to kind of break the mold. You cannot act as the way you always have. I think that's why it's very, very important for you bringing really disruptors to the marketplace in the ag innovation agenda that we need. We've got to have people from the outside. I'm just thrilled that Silicon Valley and other large, deep thinking investors are now thinking more about the food sector as a very important one. And I think the pandemic, fortunately, that's one of the silver linings. It's helped us think more about the reliability of the food supply and what it will take, whether it's vertical growing, urban farming, or the kind of agendas that we do from using satellites for productivity, precision agriculture, rural connectivity, all those kind of things that I think being nimble and agility and the willingness to change and to make variations and waivers in your ordinary regulatory processes was critical in our survival of this pandemic.
That's great. I know that, from the private sector, from venture capital investment in the whole food and agriculture sector, investment has increased from, maybe 5 years ago, it was at $2 billion venture capital investment. And last year, in 2019, it increased to 19 billion, which is a significant growth in terms of investment in the future and future technologies, which is great to see, private sector kind of stepping up, driving that forward. Maybe we'll take a look at the poll that we just launched earlier on, and hopefully maybe Jess can kind of maybe pop it up in front of us, or the audience can take a look at it, and we'll just maybe take a look at this. So, the poll was, what would we say has been the most difficult challenge in terms of the ag sector during the pandemic? And no surprise, probably number one there was minimizing the disruption to the supply chain. And then obviously closely followed by workforce availability and safety. So and obviously there was other areas around cash flow and customer retention. Interesting that there was less concerns around that and more concerns around just keeping the supply chain open and keeping people, safe and available for work. Any surprises there for you there? I mean, as you see this?
No, I think again, the very narrow needle that we had to thread here in our meat packing situation were just the top two. Obviously, worker safety was paramount there, because you have to have safe workers and healthy workers in order to minimize the disruption to the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So our president took aggressive action early on, issued an executive order indicating that our CDC, our Communicable Disease Center, would be the standard for public health requirements, and our Occupational Safety and Health Administration gave the worker safety requirements within those venues in order to do. He charged us as USDA to implement that, and really used a tool called the Defense Production Act that's usually used in wartime to say these are essential functions, understanding the criticality of the food supply, but while also doing our very best to protect the safety and health of the workers in those plants. So that was a very narrow type of bridge to cross, and I think we did that well. The companies worked with local health officials, worked with state health officials, worked with our CDC and OSHA to navigate through that, and I think that has helped us come back fairly rapidly into a single-digit production deficit now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We had a couple of questions around sustainability. I'll just, hopefully people can see the results. The questions were, my organization's sustainability initiatives would benefit from improvement to national conservation data and reporting. And just looking at the results there, people are, 34% of people were saying strongly agree. So they would definitely benefit from improvements in national conservation data. And then 34% agreed, and then it was neutral. So most people are definitely very strong on that. We had another question around, my organization has undertaken sustainability initiatives with articulated goals and benchmarks. And we had a rating of strongly agree to, disagree or don't know. And we had 30% of people saying they agree, strongly agree. 40% of people were agree, and then 22% neutral. So a very strong kind of agree to strong response on that sustainability challenge. And then the last question around sustainability was, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Innovation is key to achieving sustainability in food and agriculture. I'm obviously glad to see the answer to this one. 74% strongly agree that innovation is going to play a key role here, and 23% agree. So, basically 96% of people on the call today believe that innovation is going to make a big impact in terms of sustainability in the supply chain. Any further reflection on those, Secretary, on the sustainability? It was interesting to see that.
No, John, I think that's really encouraging, and that's really the premise of what we were talking about in February and what we've really talked about here today. And it's really doing more with less. And when you look at the scoreboard and the goals that we're holding ourselves accountable to, that's exactly what we want to do. But it really goes back to a lesson my father taught me as a young boy when I challenged maybe that he was liming a rented or a lease field rather than ours there. And he said, son, whether we rent it or we own it, it's our responsibility to leave it better than we found it. As global citizens, that's our responsibility. And I think the key to doing that is the technology that we're talking about, the investment and innovation that really can make a huge difference by doing more with less. We're going to leave a smaller environmental footprint while balancing that with the productivity gains that are going to be needed for a growing population.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously this is going to take a major public-private partnership, to unleash, global innovators, entrepreneurs, and major corporations to solve some of these challenges. And I know I'm delighted that we're able to be part of supporting these goals. And, we're going to launch our Thrive Global Challenge really to focus on supporting these goals worldwide. And we're going to challenge every entrepreneur, every corporation to come up with technologies that can help us achieve these goals in terms of doing more with less and also driving sustainability, across our supply chain. So we're on the field, Secretary.
Yeah. No doubt about it. And I think again, we do know while government-sponsored, university-sponsored research is really important. We know that many of these innovative ideas come from the private sector. There's a great opportunity and a great incentive in the private sector to design that. And I think the investment that you talked about is really encouraging, from 2 billion to 19 billion. I think all over the world, we know that we have labor challenges in agriculture. We've got to figure out how to do things with less. We have an aging population of farm workers here in the United States, and I understand that's pretty typical across the world. So just fewer and fewer people want to do some of the hard work of production agriculture, and we've got to figure out. So I expect that many of the technology of robotics and other types of sensors and other things will be part of the future of agriculture we see regarding using optics and sensor technology that we know. Satellite technology now, from a predictability perspective, can give us quantum leaps in agricultural production.
How do you think we can leverage, is there anything more we should be doing in terms of how can we leverage public-private partnerships to develop innovation and being proving grounds, or the smart farm of the future, or the technology accelerators? What do you think we can do here to be able to prove out technology in the field and adopt it across the United States?
Yeah, here's my idea, John. I think again, government has a role in maybe doing some things or sponsoring some things, funding some things that may not have a economic pathway initially, but it's that part of a basic and applied research prior to the commercialization there. I think that's the role USDA would like to play in the kind of what if discoveries out here that we need, participating with bright, curious people in the private sector willing to answer those questions. What if we did it this way? What would happen here? And we believe public funding, government funding has a responsibility to be involved in those kind of innovative things that may not have a proven concept yet, but things like you suggested with smart farms and the gee whiz kind of things of the future. That's how we discovered much of the technology in agriculture and other ways before. And you think about how rapidly, almost exponentially, this technology has grown across the world, and just how recent the internet is compared to the history of mankind. And the discovery of the tools that we have at our disposal now regarding our search engines and all the things we can have at our fingertips and in our pockets, that we would have had rooms full of computers later on, and it's only improving. We've got to harvest that kind of innovation into agriculture, because as we've seen in the pandemic, food, you can do without a lot of things, but the world and humans cannot do without food.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one last question before we maybe turn it over to some audience, Q&A, and maybe with the audience, I'll give them a nudge to say that you can upvote somebody's question as well if you want to try and get somebody's question up towards the top. I mean, probably the biggest thing, and I know you talk about this a lot, you're doing a tremendous amount of work in terms of rural connectivity, and it tends to be the hot button. And, what is it that we can do, or what can private sector help with there in terms of bringing connectivity to rural environment? I listened to Beth Ford at Land of Lakes several times. I mean, she brings this up on an ongoing basis, and most recently, she did an interview with the Washington Post, talking about this is probably one of the most fundamental key things that we need to bring, to the farms. How can we help here? Is there something, that can kind of ignite this? Because if we take the analogy of playing on the field, it's like having, two arms behind your back if you don't have connectivity.
We've talked about all the advantages technology can bring to the ag sector and the food production sector, but what is it dependent on? It's dependent on connectivity. And we are really exacerbating a digital divide in the United States. And that's one of the things that the pandemic has shown us. When schools had to close and stop congregating, how did those students get their education? And when we had to, we couldn't go to the doctor, how do you get access to a check-in, whether it's in the telehealth area? How do you get access to the global commerce of e-commerce there without connectivity? I fundamentally believe that it is one of the most transformative things we could do across the world. And interestingly, to our shame, many more undeveloped countries are ahead of the United States in this connectivity than we are. But we've got wide swaths of rural America, rural United States that are unconnected now. And it is a definite disadvantage for the future of exactly what we're talking about. Hopefully the pandemic in our remote working environment showed us the importance of being connected. It is absolutely just as important as the electrification was in the 1930s, the telephony connection we did in the 1930s. This is no longer a luxury. It's no longer a nice to have. It's become a staple of the modern global economy to be connected with one another. And that's how we learn from one another. That's how we do much of this research and innovation that we're talking about is going to be done collaboratively, not on site necessarily, but through connectivity. And if we don't have that, anyone who doesn't is going to be at a severe disadvantage. The USDA, Congress has appropriated some money that we're doing in private partnerships through telephone cooperatives, utility cooperatives, even municipal groups coming in. We're providing some of the funding and they're providing some of the funding in a partnership. But this is one of those things I was talking about. Government has to invest where it's not economically feasible initially. Government has to come in and invest in those until it becomes economically viable for the private sector to assume.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to switch to some of the questions that have come up on the Q&A, and some of these have been upvoted, and we'll take a couple of the audience questions. Let me try to get them up here in front of me as well. So I see on the top here, obviously an entrepreneur, secretary, and I know what he's looking for. Lalit Gautam, his question is, what are the action U.S. government will be taking in terms of grants or funds to support ag tech entrepreneurs like us? And he says, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of research grants, obviously, through our NIFA program. And much of this goes to university research, but there are also funds out there for innovative grants into the private sector with proposals that are written typically through that. Probably the biggest avenue is to go through university partners, but we also do independent funding of research. The USDA is a big, huge transfer organization. We don't really deploy this money all in the Agricultural Research Service of USDA. That's another outlet that I would encourage entrepreneurs to look at, is to maybe look at an arm of the Agricultural Research Service, ARS, in USDA, and join up with them with their ideas and get proof of concept in order to get funded in that way. We're looking for good ideas, and you know, if an entrepreneur has the sweat equity and needs funds for laboratory or affirmative experiments, those kind of things, and that's where we'd like to participate.
Excellent. I'm going to take another question from Aidan Connolly, who I know. He's from Agritech Capital in North Carolina. And as you can see, O'Connolly, he's obviously an Irish connection there for sure. His question, trillions of dollars are being promised to rebuild the economy, but shouldn't the money be used to reimagine agriculture and to build a digital data-driven precision farming and food system? That's a big thinking idea.
Well, it is a big thinking. I think that's essentially what you and I collaborated with in February. Yeah. It's really how do we do that, and what kind of money will it take, and the research dollars. We're spending more on research this year than we did before, and hopefully that will increase. But what is the framework? What is the platform where we deploy that? How do we bring the private sector in? There's also private equity dollars out there in the space that understand the potential. We see a lot of those issues in different types of food production systems, but certainly I think I can't dispute the need in the general economy for the stimulus that's put out there. That's needed, but we can never forget the need to continue to invest in something as vital as food production. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it may be how can we do both?
Yeah. I'll just take two more questions. Keith Hedecorn, as an Ag 30 under 30 who works with growers to increase their environmental performance through items such as carbon sequestration, I was delighted to see the news this morning regarding the bipartisan bill Growing Climate Solutions Act. In terms of the scoreboard, what metrics get the growers paid for fighting climate change, and do you envision this happening? And what do you want to see over the next year or to make this a reality? Thank you, sir. That's a good question and a long question and an important question.
Well, it is an important question. Obviously, farmers are very smart business people, and they will do what's in their best economic interest. I'm a believer in the best solution for sustainability is profitability. And if a carbon trading system is developed, I can assure you that farmers will figure out how to participate in that. We're talking every day about carbon capture within our soil, making our soils that are arable, making them carbon sinks rather than carbon emitters, using techniques like cover crops and no-till types of things that can capture that and leave that biological material in the soil to again amend the soil in a better way, hopefully to capture carbon. Obviously, we know the benefit of our trees, and the administration really is pushing the Tree and Tree program, but we can even do the same thing in our arable soils as well. I like what David Perry is doing in his research about that, and I know I guess the tree and ton type of capture of soil carbon. The good news is I think we're making progress there, but we are doing some things now. We know how to do some things now that we're not fully implementing. And how do we incentivize farmers to take those steps? I've asked our team just recently, should we be engaging already in the development of a farm bill, the next farm bill in 4 years from now, that would help incentivize farmers with the best practices that could help us meet the scoreboard that we put out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Secretary. The last question is from Tracy Chow. How is the startup community engaging with farmers to ensure the products and systems they create are actually useful and accessible to farmers?
I'm not quite sure. Why don't you try to
Yeah.
expound on the question and maybe I can answer.
Yeah, I think Tracy's getting at, basically, being able to get a technology, making sure it's solving the problem that the farmer has in the first place, and then how is the best way to make this accessible to farmers. I know that from our experience, Secretary, this is one of the things that we set out to do, very early on, is how can we bring the world of technology and agriculture together. There was definitely concerns, and I know certain farmers in California didn't like what was happening in Silicon Valley, and probably vice versa, not understanding some of the challenges in the agriculture sector. And I think what we've started to do over the last 7 years is bringing together investors, startups, technology companies as part of the Ag Tech Forum with Forbes. You attended that last year in California. I think venues like that get entrepreneurs in front of farmers. And I think the more, we work with the grower organizations, such as the Western Growers, out here in California, and obviously like the likes of the National Pork Board. We launched with the National Pork Board the first ever Swine Innovation Summit last year. And I think the more we can bring farmers into the same room and have the entrepreneur in front being able to say, hey, I've got something that will solve your problem. It's not snake oil. It's something that really works. I think that's how we found it, it was the best way to kind of do that. But it is the challenge of entrepreneurs, is to be able to reach the customer, being the farmer.
I think, again, John, what you've helped to do and what we're trying to do is really assemble an index of early adopters in the agricultural and food production space, those who are courageous enough to try new ideas. Frankly, I find them to be the high performers. And we're assembling across the country a group of these people and convening them in that. I think that could be an avenue of allowing entrepreneurs here. Let me just say again, farmers are smart business people. They're like all of us. We all have a self-interest in the economy of what we're doing, or we wouldn't be doing it in that way. Farmers can quickly identify and assess that this is going to make their operation more productive, more efficient, more profitable. And I think if entrepreneurs have that on some of these non-proven concepts, that's where the role of government comes in, and to sustain that and subsidize that to the point of proof of concept. And then you're going to see the early adopters adopt that fairly quickly. And then the herd follows very quickly. They know who the leaders are, and they will come along very quickly if that product or process or whatever is there that is better, more effective, more sustainable for their operation. Farmers really are, they have to be many, many things today. They have to be scientists, technicians, engineers, mechanics, and mathematicians, all of that. It's quite a broad array of attributes that make our best farmers. One of the things I'm excited about, I call the digitization of agriculture. The best farmers always have have this algorithm on their shoulders here, that they've been able to do the best analysis, the quickest analysis. Now with the digitization through sensor technology, optics technology, we're going to be able to move that from analog here into digitization, where more and more people can make the best decisions for productivity and profitability going forward. So communication is the key. We have a responsibility to bring together a set of early adopters who are willing and courageous enough to try new ideas. And we need to set forth, just as you're doing at the Forbes, the amalgamation of communication there, and get connectivity of people who are willing to try this in a proof of concept commercial situation.
Excellent. Well, Secretary, I really appreciate your time, this morning. I know this is, probably the most challenging time for everybody, but I know it's a significant challenge for the food supply chain and the USDA, and your time, I know, is precious, and we very much value that. I also want to thank you for your continued commitment to look forward in terms of the future of agriculture and how we can bring innovation and entrepreneurs to help the future of our farmers and the future of the land. And, you know, I think that in February when we got together, it was a very different world. And people ask me about, you know, where we're going now in terms of some of the challenges. I personally feel that we're pointed in the right direction in terms of driving innovation into the fields. And I think now is the time to accelerate, not decelerate, in terms of your vision and the focus, you know, there. So I know that there's many people from around the world here, you know, tuned in today, you know, entrepreneurs, major corporations, farmers, etc. And it's great to be able to have this conversation with you. And we'll try to hold you accountable over the next few months and years. And I would very much welcome to be able to continue this conversation, start kind of seeing the improvements that we're doing. And also I believe that this is a global opportunity and a global challenge, and reaching out to some key countries and partnering with some key countries that are major agriculture leaders, I think is going to be important for us to be able to collectively solve some of the challenges in industry.
John, I'm delighted to collaborate with you. And in fact, I look forward to our discussion of collaborating more, even in proof of concept smart farms, and doing what I said with the government in maybe unproven, uneconomic type of situations, to put things out there whether we can see whether they're going to work or not. And I look forward to collaborating with you and your network of deep thinking, the best thinkers in food production across the world. So we want to partner with you.
Thank you, Secretary. And just in wrapping up, I'd like to thank our audience, you know, today, and maybe on our next slide, Jess, I'd like to be able to mention a little bit about our upcoming webinar on June 25th. I think we discussed some of this today in terms of, say, the meat supply chain, and very much in the center of the storm that we went through was Smithfield and also the pork board. So we're going to talk about the food supply chain, how they've reacted to this, and also the future of innovation, you know, going forward. And finally, I'd like to thank you for joining in, people from all over the world. I know it's very late for some of you. It's very early out here in California, but I really appreciate you tuning in to hear from the Secretary firsthand in terms of how we're dealing with the challenges on COVID, and more importantly, how we're actually driving forward and learning from that and using innovation, you know, as a tool. I'd like to thank my team, thank Jess and Helen and the team at Thrive and SVG, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks' time on June 25th. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and be careful out there, be safe and be healthy, and hopefully we'll see each other in a physical way very soon. Take care.